What's our comfort level with the Maple Leafs goaltending tandem? Is it truly an upgrade on last season? We'll discuss that and more on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leafs-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. What's going on, Dave?
Not too bad. It was kind of funny. We were just trying to get the intro going. You got thrown off so badly that we had to redo it.
Yeah.
I felt bad for you, man.
It wasn't like I got thrown off. As I was just about to go and speak, I got a text and it was loud and I knew that it was going to end up going through the speakers. Like, all right, let's just restart. Let's just redo that thing. But by the way, before we go any further, I do want to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like you wanted to. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus. Wow, Dave, it's a late night for us. Daily, that's right. Something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So what the text was, funny enough, so on the Locked On NHL podcast, Ross Levitan, who is the host of the Locked On Senators show, and I both host the Wednesday show. And it's the Eastern Conference edition of Locked On NHL podcast. It's every Wednesday. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it wherever you get your podcast, similarly to Locked On Leafs. And we had a really fun exercise today where we drafted teams. We took, all of the players in the Eastern Conference, and we drafted teams, a full team, 4 lines, 3 D pairs, 2 goaltenders. We even drafted a coach. And then we put the teams together in Chell, and we're playing a 7-game Stanley Cup series.
Oh.
So right before you came on, he FaceTimed me for game 1 of the series because he put it together. He FaceTimed me for game 1. This thing went into quadruple overtime, Dave. Quadruple overtime. I'm not going to spoil the rest. If you want to know what happens, you're going to have to go and check out the draft we did on Locked On NHL. You're going to have to tune in next week to find out the full results. But little tease, game 1, quadruple overtime. And I'll give you one more little nugget. Sid the Kid ended it in OT, as he should. He also completely scumbag move. He had the number 1 overall pick. Who do you think he took?
I'm going to assume Connor McDavid.
No, Eastern Conference.
Oh, sorry, Eastern Conference. Austin Matthews.
He took Austin Matthews. That son of a. He's the host of Locked On Senators, and he took Austin Matthews. And here's the worst part. So my team is getting dressed up in Leafs gear. His team's getting dressed up in Sens gear. And he sends me a picture of Matthews wearing the Senators 34. And he's like, this looks pretty sick, not going to lie. I'm like, you son of a gun. You sick son of a you-know-what. It was so sickening to see. But yeah, so it's a fun little series, actually. I don't like – it would be fun for us to do something like that, too. I don't know how we could possibly do something like that, but – I'm gonna think because it's quite creative, I will say, and I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. I'll think we can do something like this as well. Do some sort of draft, whether it has to do with NHL or whatever. I think we could get creative throughout the summer and do something kind of cool. So I think we wanted today have a conversation about goaltending. The Maple Leafs made a move in net. They moved off of Ilya Samsonov, and they replaced him with Anthony Stolarz. And they said, all right, we're going forward with Joseph Woll as our guy. And they're banking on a couple of things. They're banking on him continuing to develop, and they're banking on him to stay healthy, obviously. Now, I am curious do you believe that the goaltending has been upgraded? Like, where do you sit on that conversation before we kind of dive into what the tandem is? Is it an upgrade to you at this point from last year?
I wouldn't necessarily say an upgrade because, again, we're banking on Anthony Stolarz to play more than he's ever played in his career, which is always a tough, like, asking more than what we've expected, what we've come to see is always a tough thing to project. The only upgrade I'll say is if you get league average goaltending from both Woll and Stolarz, it is an upgrade because I don't know if people remember Ilya Samsonov did not have a league average season last year other than his wins and loss record.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. But it was a lot worse earlier in the season than it was later in the season. Like the splits before New Year's and after New Year's were a little bit different. Definitely played a lot better once he returned from that absence after he was dreadful the first like 2 months of the season. Literally, like the guy couldn't put equipment on without allowing 8 goals in a game. It was absurd. So if overall you look at the stats, yeah, 40 games last year, had a 313 goals against average and 890 save percentage, but did win a lot of games, like you mentioned, 23, 7, and 8. So somehow was able to win some games for this team. That being said, it wasn't a great year for Ilya Samsonov. But it, like, are you sure Anthony Stolarz is going to give you that much better goaltending? Is Joseph Woll going to be able to remain healthy? Like that's the question for me, I suppose. And I think ultimately to answer the question, I guess I could say is yes, I think it's a little bit better for sure. I think it's a little bit better, not crazy where it's like okay, we finally have the goaltending solidified. I still think that there's question marks and concerns here between the pipes with the Maple Leafs. I think there's two big question marks really. You're looking at health, especially with Joseph Woll, right? He's been quite injury prone since college. He had a shoulder injury in the minors. He had that ankle sprain earlier in the season, and then he tweaked his back and at the end of Game 6 and was unavailable for the team in a do or die Game 7 in the Stanley Cup playoffs. It's that's a legitimate concern that people can have when it comes to Joseph Woll. That's the guy you want to be your number one. Didn't you make that mistake once before, Brendan Shanahan and the Toronto Maple Leafs, when you brought in Matt Murray to be the number one? Didn't you learn from your mistakes by trying to trust people who have bad luck, with a rash of injuries? Now I do recall Brad Treliving kind of stating that these injuries were more fluky than stuff that is like recurring, and he believes that it's just bad luck as opposed to being injury prone. Guess that remains to be seen. I guess we'll find out. But health is definitely the main concern, I would say. But then also like a lack of experience. I feel like people don't understand how little of NHL experience Joseph Woll actually has. Like, we're ready to anoint this guy as the number one. And when I say we, I guess we should say Brad Treliving and the Toronto Maple Leafs are anointing this guy as the number one starter for the team. He's played 42 NHL games, Dave, including playoff games. That includes the series against the Panthers and this year when he came in against the Bruins. So including the playoffs, he's got just 42 games played at the NHL level. That's not a lot of experience to know if someone is the guy or not. So you're kind of rolling the dice that he, develops properly. You're throwing him into the fire a little bit, and it's going to be kind of sink or swim. And if he sinks, do you rely on Anthony Stolarz, who at 30 years old barely has 100 games under his belt? Like, it's a very inexperienced tandem, and both Joseph Woll and Stolarz have never been number ones. It's going to be interesting to see kind of how those two can come out of it. How they're going to. One of them's going to have to play a bulk of the games. I assume they would hope that it's Woll, but I would say those are the two concerns: the health, and then just the overall lack of experience when it comes to both goaltenders at this point. They've combined to play 150 games at the NHL level. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, I call it the roll of the dice tandem, right? You're kind of hoping that what you have will work. The experience part definitely, it's concerning because I don't know many teams that roll out a tandem quite like that. There aren't many teams that do it. But on top of that, like I think with Stolarz, yeah, he hasn't played a lot of games, but he's been in the NHL for a bit, right? He's not this is not like a guy who's only played like a couple of seasons in NHL. He's been around, from his time in Anaheim to then Florida. And like I do like what I'm hearing about Stolarz, not just like from what analysts are saying, but also just himself. That whole year of being with Bobrovsky, what he learned from Bobrovsky, right? I think those are things that again come with experience and learning those things. So yeah, there's gonna be some challenges, and I guess that's why you kind of keep Matt Murray around as kind of the insurance policy. Although that's like the biggest diciest insurance policy you can have.
We're going back to the health concerns, even when we go down to goal number 3. Health concerns aplenty with that guy.
Yeah, so the Leafs are gonna have to release. Like you heard Brad Treliving kind of talk about, we got to figure out to get Joe Woll healthy, all those things. We weren't able to do it with Matt Murray. So it makes you wonder also maybe the changes that they made last year with the goaltending coaches can kind of inspire a little bit more confidence, right? In getting Joseph Woll right going into this year.
But where does the tandem rank in terms of the Atlantic Division? Why don't we come back and have that discussion on the other side? And also, a couple of prospects making the list for top 20 goaltending prospects from Scott Wheeler. 2 Leafies made the list. We'll tell you who that is also in a little bit. It's Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
We're driven by the search for better. When it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find your quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. So join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Make sure you support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire. You need Indeed.
Hello and welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast with Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti. As we are each and every weekday here on the Locked On Leafs show, you can find it every day, Monday through Friday, wherever you get your podcasts, and also up on YouTube. So we're just talking about the goaltending tandem. It's a goalie show today, diving deep into where they rank now in terms of the division. And, my first thought was probably not high, but as I was looking into the tandems within this division, there's a lot of uncertainty in goal here in Toronto or in the Atlantic Division. I mean, outside of, I guess you could say, Bobrovsky and Vasilevsky, and I think we could probably put Swayman, I guess, in there as well now. Lots of question marks everywhere else, and guys where it's like, okay, let's see what you got type of situation. So why don't we go through and look at the tandems and maybe make the decision on where they should rank within the division. So, I mean, let's start up at the top, I guess, just to kind of make things a lot easier. I think we could both make the argument that the Tampa Bay tandem, just because of Andre Vasilevsky, probably has the best goaltending situation. And maybe we can even rank it as goaltending situation because the backup might not matter if Vasilevsky plays the way he can for 60 games.
I mean, that's the thing with Vasilevsky, right? You're getting the best goaltender in the NHL, right? When he is healthy and he is performing at the level that is expected of him. And the Tampa Bay Lightning realized just how important Vasilevsky is, when he's not around, and how much better they are when he is around, right? They don't exactly have the best blue line, but that doesn't usually really matter because they have Andrei Vasilevsky in net, right? He got a pretty sizable deal too, and that hasn't swayed his play at all. Yeah, maybe in that series against the Leafs, he wasn't at his best, right? When got outdueled by Ilya Samsonov. But at the same time, I think this is also a goaltender that has had a very big workload, right? And literally
Well,
had
and he
that
got injured. Like the injury too, right? Like
yeah.
that's gonna help, or that's gonna hurt him, right? He came in midway through the season too. Wasn't the best year, but I still think Vasilevsky's the best goalie in the league, and he's number one. Like I don't think it's that much of a debate at this point.
No,
That he's
he
the
is
best goalie.
undoubtedly the best goaltender in the league. I would take
and
9 times out of 10.
Yeah, and the Lightning have the best goalie situation, if that's what we're power ranking with him in the fold. Up next, would you say it's probably the Florida Panthers and Sergei Bobrovsky, and now I guess Spencer Knight, I'm assuming, would kind of come in and be the backup, or did they sign someone else actually after Stolarz left, or are they hoping that it's finally Spencer Knight's time to shine? Let me actually double check to see.
Considering what they're
They brought in Chris Driedger, actually. I forgot they brought Chris Driedger back in to the fold. We got Bob's, Driedger, and Spencer Knight, possibly.
Yeah, but I just look at what they've invested in Spencer Knight. Like, first off, he was a first round pick.
Mm-hmm.
They gave him a pretty sizable deal. I know he dealt with his with some off ice issues last year, and that kind of derailed his season. But I mean, like, I think they view him quite high. That there was a point in time where I thought maybe him and Bobrovsky were going to be sharing the duties, right, and we weren't going to get that true Sergei Bobrovsky one number one situation. So I mean, if Knight plays to the potential that is there, yeah, I think him and Bobrovsky really do make up quite a formidable tandem, and it's an expensive tandem too. Which,
yeah,
it reminds me of like when the Dallas Stars had Khudobin and Ben Bishop, and that tandem was so expensive. Like, for some teams it works, for other teams it's like, don't know if that's the right path to go. So I do think with Spencer Knight, it was a tough year, but I think there's potential there for him to step up and play more, and they're gonna have to consider what they have invested.
Yeah, but regardless, I mean, we're just taking a look at where they rank. I mean, they're the second best goalie situation, I would say, in the division. So, we're just trying to see where Toronto ranks in terms of the 8 teams in the Atlantic. Is there another team that kind of jumps off the page to you that you think kind of fits in at number 3? Or is this where we can start really dissecting and taking a look? Or is there at least one more team up there you think where it's like, I like that situation?
I mean, if you look at Swayman, it's tough to not say that Boston's 3 with Swayman. Such
Korpisalo, they brought in Korpisalo was part of the Boston trade. You put Korpisalo in front of Boston's D, he'll probably give you just as good as minutes as Ullmark gave them anyway.
That was my thing. I know a lot of people are like especially Senators fans are so happy to get away from Korpisalo. I mean, they find ways to make goalies that have had tough years. Like, before Ullmark was in Boston, he was with the Sabres, and the Sabres gave up on him.
Yeah,
and he resurrected his career in Boston. Like, I think there was a little bit more there, and they kind of gave up on him too easy in Buffalo. But I think Boston, when you look at Swayman, he takes a lot of pressure off of whoever the number 2 guy is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know there's always that, is he the true number 1 goalie? He is the true number 1 goalie. That whole idea of him and Ullmark in the playoffs, I think that was silly. Like, Swayman was like, he stonewalled the Leafs. Did the Panthers kind of expose him a little bit? Yes, but I do think that there's that's a goalie that the Bruins are so happy to get because he just makes it so much easier to play in front of if you're a defenseman, knowing you have a goaltender like Swayman there. So yeah, like he other than like he's almost even close to like battling up with Bobrovsky as like among the top starters in the Atlantic. Like I think it's still Vasilevsky, but I would probably put Swayman quite high up on that list.
Yeah, I think for sure he probably comes in, right there at number 3 for me behind Vasilevsky and Bobrovsky. I think number 3 probably sounds about right. Obviously, he's better than Ullmark. That's why Boston moved on, right? They didn't move the better goalie. They moved the one that was, the one that they had excess of, which was, the backup netminder. So I think, we can comfortably say that. Speaking of Ullmark, now that he's in Ottawa, it's going to be Linus Ullmark and Anton Forsberg. Does that, like, Ullmark's a former Vezina winner. Now, Ullmark in Boston, I think for sure, you look at that and you're like, that's a great tandem that you've got now, Ullmark and Forsberg. But in front of Ottawa's blue line, I think there's still going to be question marks on how he performs. So is that still the fourth best, or is this where we can kind of start to look around and see what else there is?
I'm more inclined to think that this is where I would say it's tough to give Ullmark that nod in Ottawa.
Okay.
Right?
So here's what we should do then. So let's go through the rest of the tandems. And then at this point, this is where we got to kind of power rank them. So we've got our top 3 set. We need the Tampa Bay Lightning because they got Andrei Vasilevsky. They're set. Sergei Bobrovsky, he's set at number 2. And his backup, whether it's going to be Chris Driedger or it's going to be Spencer Knight, they've got a good goalie situation there. And then same thing in Boston. Yeah, Jeremy Swayman taking over as the number 1. He was fantastic this past season, both in the regular season and the postseason. And then they get Korpisalo coming in to be the backup, and I'm sure he'll be perfectly fine behind that blue line. So now we're going to take a look at 4 through 8 and kind of see how else this shakes up and where the Maple Leafs fall in this ranking. So we'll continue the conversation on the other side. It's Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. You listen to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games. And the sports aren't sports like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I got to do is open up the app, dream up some bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel. Start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Network. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. It's Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti with you here on the show, and we're continuing to take a look at where the Maple Leafs goaltending tandem, the goaltending situation, we'll call it, in Toronto, and where does it rank in terms of the rest of their division rivals. So far, we've got the Tampa Bay Lightning as the top goaltending situation with Andrei Vasilevsky. We've got Florida at number 2 in the Atlantic Division, and then we've got the Boston Bruins with Swayman taking over there as the number 3 goaltending tandem. So let me lay out who the tandems are for the rest of the teams. And then from there, we can kind of start to put the other puzzle pieces together from 4 through 8. So Toronto, obviously, we know here you've got Joseph Woll and you've got Anthony Stolarz. In Montreal, you've got Samuel Montembeault and you've got Caden Primo. The Buffalo Sabres have Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen and Devin Levi. The Ottawa Senators, Linus Ullmark and Forsberg. And then the Detroit Red Wings have Cam Talbot and Alex Lyon, the Lion King in Detroit. And technically, I believe Jack Campbell is also in Detroit too, if I'm not mistaken, as the tertiary goaltender. Isn't that crazy? The 2 starters a couple of years ago. Actually, no, that's not true. No, they didn't play together. I was going to say together, Jack Campbell and Murray replaced Campbell after he had left for Edmonton. But regardless, both of them now number 3 goalies in the league at this point. So was one of those tandems that stuck out to you a little bit above the rest that you think we can slide in at number 4?
I mean, if this might sound like a homer pick, and it definitely is, but I still like what I see from Joseph Woll. Like, if you're getting anywhere close to what we saw in the playoffs, and even during the early in the regular season, Joseph Woll was performing at an incredible rate for the Leafs, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at his stats right now throughout the regular season. He was 21, 13, and 1 with a 912 save percentage. In the playoffs, he had a 933 save percentage with a 178 goals against average. So stellar play. But again, short, small sample size. That's the only thing. So I think, let me ask you this, Dave.
Yeah.
Right now, assuming cap had nothing to do with it, just pure, it's just fantasy mode. It doesn't matter. Would you trade Woll and Stolarz for Ullmark and Forsberg? Cap
I
means nothing.
consider it. I consider it.
For this season only. Like, we're talking 1 year, you got to win a championship. Would you make that trade?
I consider it, but I would still bet on the talent of Joseph Woll. I think there's more there. And the playoffs, even the playoffs against the Panthers the year before, I think show that there's talent there, the potential's there for him.
I mean, Ullmark won a Vezina 2 years ago. Like, I feel like you're forgetting about. Like,
I didn't forget it.
But
definitely
like, you're talking about, like, okay, what does Joseph Woll become? Linus Ullmark? I feel like you're sleeping on Ullmark here.
My thing here too is you also have to remember Anton Forsberg. He was really good a couple of years ago, but the last 2 years have been not so kind to him. And it's not like he's played a lot, right? Injuries have been a concern for Forsberg as well. And yes, Ullmark had that Vezina year. He's also had some just average years as well in between that, right?
Well, I mean, his first year in Boston was well documented. He had some struggles adjusting, but then the last 2 years are pretty good.
I mean, they've been solid.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, pretty good. They've been Vezina level good. Like,
well, the year he won the Vezina, and like that's where Swayman was starting to come in.
You're telling me that if Ottawa right now called you up and said, "Hey, we'll give you Linus Ullmark for Joseph Woll, we'll retain him at 50% so that it's the same contract," you wouldn't do that?
No, I wouldn't.
Wow.
Personally, I wouldn't, because I also look back at Ullmark's Vezina year. Again, the stats are incredible, but what happened to him in the playoffs? He got replaced in the playoffs by Jeremy Swayman, and that kind of led to that change where he was moved out for Swayman.
Okay, what happened to? Now I don't want to sit here and bash our guy, but what happened to Joseph Woll in Game 7 of the playoffs?
He didn't play.
That's unavailable. And what's the best ability?
It is availability. I do agree on that.
You're not gonna put that into consideration here?
Nope, I'm not.
All right. You win. We're gonna put the Maple Leafs as the number 4 tandem, and then I guess we got to go with Ottawa at 5. Then, like,
Senators is right behind it. Yes.
Yeah. So Ottawa's got to be right behind them at number 5 for sure. And then you're looking at a couple of young teams, right? Like, you've got Montreal. They've got Sam Montembeault, who actually had a really good year last season. If you look at his numbers, they're actually quite good. I think they like him a lot, along with Caden Primo, who's a prospect who they've liked for a couple of seasons. So one of those two, they're hoping, both of them, they're hoping that they can ride forward with one of those guys turning into a stud. Same situation with Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen and Devin Levi. Luukkonen actually had an outstanding final 6 weeks of the season. I had him in fantasy for the final little bit. Crushed. He was outstanding for the NHL fantasy playoffs. So that's another, pretty good one. And then it's the complete opposite in Detroit, where it's just full on veterans, Cam Talbot and Alex Lyon. Talbot, opposite of those guys, he fell apart in the back half of last season. He's like 40 years old. I think I feel comfortable, honestly, putting Detroit at 8.
They're so bad. Like like you, I don't know how the Red Wings. I know this is a team that eventually wants to be a contender and go into the playoffs. That tandem, like, good
Yeah,
lord,
it's not good, eh? As
it's
as Phil
brutal.
Kessel once said, it's not good, eh?
Nope,
All
not
right.
great.
So we can pencil in Detroit at 8. So 6 and 7. So pretty much we got to decide who's got the better goalie tandem: the Montreal Canadiens with Sam Montembeault and Cam Primo, or Caden Primo, or the Sabres with Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen and Devin Levi. I have a lean. I'm curious where you're at.
Yeah, I think some people sleep on how good Montable and Kane Puro could be, but I also just think that's such an unproven tandem, and I liked more of what I saw from the Sabres, especially from Pekka Luukkonen. I would go Sabres over the Canadians. I think the Canadians will eventually get that tandem can be better as the Canadians become better.
Yeah, I think it's almost it's very much a coin flip. It's similar to, Toronto and Ottawa where it's a coin flip. I think there's a coin flip in the 6 and 7 hole as well here when you look at the Buffalo Sabres and the Montreal Canadiens, because both of those are, good young goalies who are starting to find their way. Um, I'm just trying to see. I'm gonna try and pull up the stats here to see what the season stats were for both of these goaltenders. Um, so Sam Montembeault, like the stats weren't flattering, I guess. He used a 314 goals against, a 903 save percentage. Caden Primo had a 910 save percentage and a 299 goals against. So Primo had a little bit better numbers. Meanwhile, out in Buffalo, like we saw some better numbers out of the goaltending tandem out there. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, a 257 goals against average and a 910 save percentage, 5 shutouts, and actually had a winning record 27, 22, and 4 on a team that was not very good last year in the Buffalo Sabres. So I for sure am good with putting the Buffalo Sabres as the number 6 team. And then, I guess we'll roll with the Montreal Canadiens tandem as the 7th best tandem in the Atlantic.
Mm-hmm. I just see also when you're looking at tandems, you're kind of looking at both goaltenders. I just also feel that Pekka Luukkonen is so much better than Montembeault that's what gives, I think, Buffalo the edge.
Yeah, I think Levi is also better than Caden Primo. So like they're both better. They're both better. Like the number 1 and the number 2 is better. So yeah, I think Buffalo deserves to be there. But again, you're right. So like as we do this exercise, are the Leafs screwed? Like do they look at this inexperienced goaltending and think, "Oh, how are you going to win with that? How are you going to compete in this division?" Goaltending's not that great in this division. You're good up top, right? Uh with Tampa, they got Vasilevsky, obviously Bobrovsky in Florida, Jeremy Swayman's gonna do his thing in Boston. And it really is kind of a crapshoot. Like, yes, Linus Ullmark has been a Vezina winning goaltender before, but that was in Boston system. Outside of Boston system, when he was with Buffalo, he was not a Vezina winning goaltender, and he wasn't good enough to be Buffalo's goaltender. So is he could be what are we going to see out of him in Ottawa? So that's kind of the big question mark there. We spoke at length at the question marks with the Maple Leafs, with Ottawa, obviously, or with Buffalo. Can Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen and Devin Levi take that next step? Right, it's not just a 6-week stretch that we need to see solid goalie play at Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. Need to see it for the whole season. You could say the same thing with the Montreal Canadiens with Montembeault and Primo. And Detroit, I don't know what the hell they're doing. They had a couple of good prospects, though. I will say that they got some good up and coming goaltending prospects. And I guess we can quickly get into that because the Maple Leafs actually had 2 players on Scott Wheeler's top 20 drafted goalie prospects. They did have 2 players on it. Well, okay, they had 1 player that was named to the top 20, and then 1 was an honorable mention. But talking about the guys within the division, there's actually quite a few. Like Jacob Fowler is the 3rd goaltending prospect in the NHL, according to Scott Wheeler. He's a Montreal Canadiens prospect. Spencer Knight, the 4th overall goaltending prospect. He's with the Florida Panthers. Devin Levi, he's 5th prospect, and he's with the Buffalo Sabres. Sebastian Cossa and Trey Augustine, both of which are the 8th best tender. They're with the Detroit Red Wings. So there's a lot of really solid goalie prospects, young goalies that are in the East that are making their way up to help those teams that we talked about that are near the bottom of the list. And Toronto, you got to scroll all the way down to Dennis Hildeby, who is the 20th ranked goaltending prospect for the Maple Leafs here, and for Scott Wheeler's rankings in the Athletic. He is the top goalie prospect for the Maple Leafs, obviously, and 20th overall, apparently, according to Scott Wheeler. And then Artur Akhtiamov was considered an honorable mention, one who just missed the top 20 list. So, there's a couple of guys. The Maple Leafs haven't done a great job developing goaltending of late. Now, Joseph Woll seems to be breaking through, and there's a couple other guys that maybe can break through and help this team at some point, potentially down the road. But so that's where things stand when it comes to the goaltending position in Toronto and within the division.
Yeah, I mean, the goaltending can be such a crapshoot. You can have just elite goaltending one year, and then the next year could fall off, right?
Brock was the king of that for years.
Oh yeah, and like you got again, you talk about the prospects emerging in this division. Again, these are prospects, goaltending prospects. It's tough to really assume that they're all going to pan out, right?
That's right. But ask Justin Pogge.
Oh man, that's a rough one. That's a rough one there.
Once upon a time, he was a top up-and-coming goalie prospect, right? Star for the World Juniors, and
I mean, James Reimer was a can't-miss type of guy, right? When he came up and he pushed them, gave them a chance. Now he did help them get to a playoff round, albeit in a shortened season.
How'd that end? I don't recall.
No, please, no. Stop. And I mean, there's also, remember Jonathan Bernier when they traded for him, he was like that next
guy. Right. Yeah. I mean, Fred Anderson worked out, right? He was a younger guy who they needed to get if he were in a different situation with a chance to be a number one, he could flourish. That one worked out. So they saw that talent and it worked out for them. But yeah, I mean, like Joseph Woll's played 42 games at the NHL level, regular season and playoffs. Like, there's a learning curve still to come with Joseph Woll. That's all I'll say. Like, Jack Campbell looked fantastic in his first 50 games as a Maple Leaf. The next 50 games, and then when he went to Edmonton, not great, Bob. Not great. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, time will tell. If these rankings are true, time will tell if Joseph Woll's the real deal Holyfield for this team. So we'll see how it all plays out later on this season. All right, that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on X at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at _Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.